Mara Idowu was 3 stitches into Denny Okafor's palm when the sky over Holloway Bend cracked open. It didn't look like much from inside the clinic. A flash through the window, greenish white, there and gone, followed 4 seconds later by a sound like a door slamming somewhere very far underground. Denny flinched. The needle skipped a millimeter off course, and Mara swore under her breath and steadied his hand with her own.
Hold still. You're the one who put a fence staple through himself.
That wasn't the fence's fault.
I'm sure it apologized.
She finished the stitch, tied it off, and only then let herself glance at the window. Corrigan's Reach hung its usual gray light over the valley, the kind of pale non-color the moon's thin atmosphere produced instead of a real sky. Nothing up there now. Whatever had made that flash was already down. Her radio crackled before she'd even reached for it. Hollis Fenn's voice, flat in the way it got when he wanted people to think he wasn't worried.
Mara, you seeing this?
I heard it. What was it?
Don't know yet. Tracking station clocked something coming in hot over the ridge. No transponder, no distress call. Came down somewhere past the old quarry. Compact's already got a flag on it. Automated. Some kind of unregistered debris alert.
Debris doesn't usually announce itself with a light show.
No, it doesn't.
That was the whole of it for about 6 minutes. 6 minutes in which Mara finished bandaging Denny's hand, told him to keep it dry, and watched him leave through the clinic door, still turning to look at the sky like it might do something else interesting. Then the door opened again, hard enough to bang the wall, and it was Toby Kessler, 14 years old, out of breath, boots leaving quarry dust across her floor in a way that would have earned a lecture on any other day.
Doc, you gotta come.
Toby,
There's something in the wreck. It's alive. I think it's alive. It's got lights on it, like moving lights, and it looked right at me, and I didn't know if I should. He stopped, hands on his knees, breathing hard. I didn't touch it. I ran.
Mara was already reaching for her field bag. The quarry road hadn't seen real traffic in a decade, not since the ore contracts moved to the southern basin, and the truck bounced hard enough over the ruts that Mara had to brace her bag against the door. Hollis met them at the turnoff in his own vehicle, 2 more trucks from town, falling in behind. Word traveled fast in a place with 400 people and 1 working relay tower. By the time they crested the last rise, there were maybe a dozen people standing in a loose half circle around the impact site, keeping a careful distance, the way you'd keep distance from a downed power line. The craft, if that was the word, had come apart on landing. Not exploded exactly, more like it had folded, the way a piece of paper folds when you crush it in your fist, seems splitting along lines that looked almost deliberate. Smoke rose thin and gray from somewhere inside the wreckage, and underneath the smoke, low against the broken hull, something pulsed. Light, not a fire, not an instrument panel, a soft, living light, shifting color the way a bruise shifts color over days. Except it was doing it in seconds, blue-green, then a deeper violet, then a color Mara didn't have a name for, something between the two. It came from a shape curled small against a bent strut, arms wrapped around its own knees, and it took Mara a full 3 seconds of staring to understand that the shape was a person. Not a human person. The proportions were wrong in a careful, deliberate way, the kind of wrong that read as not human rather than injured human. A longer torso, joints that sat higher on the limbs than they should, skin with a faint sheen like wet stone, and threading across the collarbone and down both forearms, patterns of light like handwriting nobody in Holloway Bend could read. Nobody moved. Hollis had a hand resting near his hip, not on the sidearm exactly, just near it, the way you'd stand near a fence you weren't sure was electrified. That a kid? Mara didn't answer because she was already crossing the open ground toward the wreck, and later she would not be able to explain why that had felt like the only possible thing to do, except that she'd stopped needing more information than a body in distress is a body in distress a long time ago.
Doc,
I'm just looking.
Up close, the light patterns resolved into something almost like breathing. They pulsed slower when she slowed her own approach, crouching a few feet off, hands open and visible, the way you'd approach a spooked animal. The figure's head came up. Its eyes were large, dark, set slightly wider than a human face would place them, and they fixed on Mara with an intensity that made the hair go up on her arms. Not aggression, something closer to a held breath. The light along its collarbone flared bright violet, held, then dimmed to a slow, steady blue-green, like a held note settling into something calmer.
Okay. Okay. I've got you.
She had no idea if it understood a word of it. It didn't matter. Its shoulders came down half an inch, and that was the only translation she needed. The next hour blurred the way emergencies always blurred. Mara had no reference for what normal looked like in this body, so she built one on the spot. She found the places that were clearly wrong by the way the lights stuttered and spiked when she touched them. A sharp, sourceless white flare over what she guessed was a fractured limb. A duller, slower rust-red glow over bruised ribs, distinct from the harder white flash the fracture drew. She learned by the third careful press of her fingers that the light wasn't decoration. It reacted. It answered. Pain made it jagged. Her own steadying voice, low and even, made it settle, fractionally, each time, like a compass needle finding north.
You're going to feel this. It's not going to feel good. I'm sorry.
The light flared white-hot for a single second, and then astonishingly dimmed again, faster than the pain alone could account for, as if some decision had been made on the other side of it, a choice to hold still rather than fight. Mara filed that away too, the same way she'd filed away everything else that day, without understanding it yet, only trusting that it mattered. Hollis kept the crowd back with nothing more than his presence and an outstretched arm, and radioed the tracking station twice, and got nothing but confused, half-formed silence in return, both times. Whoever was on shift at the relay tower clearly had no more information than anyone standing in the quarry did. By the time they had the child, and Mara was calling it a child in her head by then, had been for a while, on no evidence except the size of the hands, and the way it had stopped flinching at her voice somewhere around the 20-minute mark, loaded onto a stretcher and into the truck bed, the light on the collarbone had settled into a slow, steady rhythm that looked for all the world like exhausted sleep. Toby rode in the back with her. He'd appointed himself for the job without being asked, which was very like him, and he sat with his knees pulled up, watching the light patterns shift with the same fascination he brought to a stripped engine.
What do we call it?
We don't know if it's an it, or a boy or a girl, or something else. We don't know anything yet.
It looks like a fig.
With the total confidence of a 14-year-old who had just decided something, Toby continued. When the light goes purple like that, right before it goes calm, like the inside of a fig when you cut it open. Mara looked at the slow violet to blue-green pulse of the collarbone and had to admit privately that he wasn't wrong.
Fig. Fine, until we know better.
Holloway Bend had one building large enough to hold a town meeting on short notice, and by the time Mara had Fig settled in the back room of the clinic, stable, splinted, breathing on her own in whatever passed for that species' version of breathing, most of the adults in town had already found their way to the Grange Hall 2 doors down, because that was what happened in a town this size. Somebody heard something, and within 2 hours, everybody had heard it, filtered through 6 different people, each version slightly wrong. Hollis stood at the front with his hat off, which he only did when he was being serious.
Here's what I know. Unregistered craft came down past the quarry. No transponder. Compact tracking flagged it automatic, which means somewhere a desk on the Reach's main station already has a file open on it, whether we say anything or not. There was a survivor. A juvenile, best anybody can tell. Docs got her at the clinic.
Who's juvenile? Whose is she?
Don't know yet.
You don't know, or you don't want to say?
Hollis's jaw worked. I don't know, Ada. Craft's not one I recognize, and I've seen most of the registered hauler and patrol designs that come through here. My best guess, and it's a guess, is Ashkarai. The build's close to the description in the border advisories.
That got a stir through the room, the particular kind of quiet that was louder than shouting. Everyone in Holloway Bend knew what the Ashkarai were. In the vague, second-hand way, border towns knew things. A species out past the Reach's edge of compact space, not officially at war, not officially at peace either. A cold 30-year standoff that occasionally produced a patrol clash or a trade dispute nobody explained fully to civilians. The compact called it sustained tension. The advisories called it exercise appropriate caution near unregistered contacts. Nobody in this room had ever expected the tension to land quite literally in the quarry. How bad is bad? with the Ashkarai. Actually, not advisory language bad, actually bad.
Hollis rubbed the back of his neck. I did 2 tours on a compact patrol cutter before I settled here. Back before most of you knew me. Never fought the Ashkarai directly. That line stayed cold the whole time I served. But I met people who had, on both sides of that cold stretch. And what I heard, consistently, was that they don't start fights lightly. And they don't back down from ones they've already started, disciplined, organized. Not cruel, from what I ever heard, but not sentimental either. They don't make exceptions for a border town that didn't ask to be involved. I'm not telling you that to scare anybody. I'm telling you because I think we ought to go into this with our eyes open.
So we've got an Ashkarai kid in the doc's back room.
We've got an injured kid. Species is a question for later. Right now she's got a fractured arm, some kind of bruising along her ribs I can't fully assess because I don't have a reference anatomy for her, and she hasn't said a word, if she even has words the way we'd understand them. She's a kid who fell out of the sky today. That's what I know.
And what happens when whoever she belongs to comes looking? That was the question, and Mara watched it land on every face in the room. Watched people do the math they'd all grown up doing without ever having to say it out loud. This was a border town, 400 people, no defense worth the name, entirely dependent on the goodwill of a compact administration 11 hours away by shuttle.
Then they come looking. And we tell them the truth. We found a hurt kid, and we treated her. That's not a crime under any law I've heard of, compact or otherwise.
The voice from the back said, "That's not what I asked." Hollis didn't have an answer for that one. Nobody did, not yet. The meeting broke up unresolved, the way most meetings in Holloway Bend did, with people drifting home to think it over on their own porches, and Mara walked back to the clinic under a darkening gray sky with a specific, settled feeling of someone who already knew what she was going to do. Whatever the answer to that question turned out to be. Fig was awake when she got back, propped against the pillows Mara had rigged for her, watching the door with those wide, dark, unreadable eyes. The light along her collarbone flickered, not the calm blue-green from before, something faster, more anxious, like a held breath about to break.
Hey, it's just me.
The light slowed, not all the way to calm, but it slowed. Mara sat with her a long while that night, longer than the medicine strictly required, filling out the paperwork she'd need to send eventually to whatever office in the compact system handled things like this, and finding, with every line she wrote, that she had almost nothing true to put in most of the boxes. Species, probable, unconfirmed, age, estimate only, name, unknown. She left that last one blank for a long moment before writing, in small, deliberate letters, currently answers to Fig, pending further information, and felt faintly ridiculous doing it, and did it anyway. Around midnight, when the clinic had gone fully quiet and Mara had convinced herself the child was finally asleep, the light along the collarbone flared once, sudden, and Fig's hand shot out, not toward Mara, not toward the door, but toward the window, toward the dark shape of the wrecked craft's smoke, still faintly visible on the ridge, miles off, a thin gray thread against a darker gray sky. The sound that came out of her then wasn't a word. It wasn't even quite a cry. It was low, and it went on for longer than Mara expected a single breath to allow, and it carried in it something Mara didn't need a translator to understand, because grief sounded the same in every language she'd ever heard it in, human or otherwise. She didn't try to stop it. She sat beside the bed, one hand resting light on the uninjured shoulder, saying nothing at all, and let it run its course, the way she would have for anyone. Toward the end of it, the sound softened, and the light along the collarbone slowed to something duller, sadder, but steadier, and eventually Fig's hand came down from the window and found Mara's sleeve instead, and held on, not hard, just enough to be noticed, and stayed there until she slept. Outside, past the clinic's one window, the first stars were coming out over Corrigan's Reach, cold and thin and very far away. And somewhere out past all of them, Mara knew without being told, a message had already gone out. Whatever ship that had been, whoever it belonged to, somebody, somewhere, would already know it was gone. The only question left was how long it would take them to come looking, and what Holloway Bend would say when they did. It took 10 days for the first sign, and by then Fig had a name that stuck, a splint that had graduated to a soft brace, and a standing arrangement with 3 different households who took turns bringing meals to the clinic's back room because it turned out, through trial, error, and a food dehydrator, Toby's mother volunteered without being asked twice that Fig could eat most of what humans ate in smaller portions with an enthusiasm for anything involving dried apple that made the light along her collarbone spike a color Mara had started privately calling delighted. She hadn't spoken a word, not in any language, in those 10 days, but she'd started to communicate all the same. Mara worked it out first, mostly by accident. The lights weren't just mood, they were syntax. Fast pulses of pale color for questions, a held, steady tone for agreement, a specific stuttering violet always in the same rhythm that Mara eventually understood meant something like, wait. She'd do it with her hand half raised, the light stuttering across her wrist, whenever someone moved too fast or reached for something before she was ready. Toby figured out the rest, because Toby had the patience of a 14-year-old with nothing better to do all summer and an engine's worth of curiosity aimed, for once, at something that could look back at him. He spent afternoons in the clinic's back room with a slate and a stylus, drawing shapes, watching Fig's light respond, building, slowly, imperfectly, but building, something that functioned like a shared vocabulary. By the second week, he could ask her simple questions and get simple, legible answers. Does it hurt? A slow, dim pulse? Less. Do you want to go outside? A bright, fast flare? Yes. He kept a running list in the back of his slate, updated almost daily, color next to meaning, next to a small hand-drawn note about context, pale blue, steady, calm, amber, slow, tired, amber, fast, hungry. He'd worked that one out by trial and error over the course of one long, occasionally comic afternoon involving most of the dried fruit in his mother's pantry. Violet stuttering, wait, or sometimes no, depending on whether the hand came up with it. White, sudden and sharp. Pain, always, without exception, the one color that never seemed to mean anything else. He showed the list to Mara one evening, visibly proud of it, and she'd sat with him at the clinic's small kitchen table, going through it line by line, adding her own observations from the medical side, including the duller rust red she'd seen once, that first night, over the bruised ribs, and never again since the bruising healed. Until between the two of them, they'd built something that looked, by any reasonable standard, like the beginnings of an actual language.
Somebody at the compact's going to want this list someday, whoever ends up studying this properly.
Toby had shrugged, unbothered by the thought of history. They can have it when I'm done with it. I'm not done with it.
It was Toby who first noticed the mimicry, though he didn't think much of it at the time. He had a habit, when he was thinking hard about something, of tapping 2 fingers against his knee in a specific absent rhythm. His mother said he'd done it since he was a toddler, some private metronome nobody had ever explained. 3 days into their afternoons together, Mara walked into the back room to find Fig sitting exactly the way Toby sat when he was puzzling over a drawing, knees up and tapping 2 fingers against her own knee in that same rhythm, watching him with an expression that, if she'd had human features, Mara would have called pleased with herself.
She's copying you.
She's been doing it for like an hour. I didn't even notice at first.
Mara filed it away without quite knowing why it mattered. It would matter, later. There was a day, in the middle of that second week, that Mara would think about often afterward. It was a Sunday, which meant nothing official in Holloway Bend, but meant informally that half the town found its way to the Grange Hall's porch by mid-afternoon, and someone had gotten the idea, nobody would later admit whose idea it had been, to bring Fig outside for the first time since the crash, into real daylight, under the moon's thin gray sky. She had stood very still at first, in the doorway, one hand braced on the frame, and Mara had almost suggested going back inside. But then Fig's eyes had gone to the ridgeline, the long, slow roll of hills beyond the quarry, gray-green scrub grass moving in the thin wind, and the light along her collarbone had done something Mara hadn't seen it do before. A wide, slow bloom of gold that spread from her collarbone down both forearms and held there, steady, for almost a full minute. What's that one mean?
I don't know. I don't think we've seen it before.
I think it means she likes it. Look at her. She's not doing the wait thing. She's not doing the anxious thing. She's just standing there.
He'd been right, more right than any of them understood at the time. Mara would learn weeks later that gold was the color Ashkarai's skin, turned for something closer to wonder than to happiness exactly. A private, specific shade of I did not know this was possible, and I am glad I know now. The same color that had crossed Fig's collarbone the first time she saw dried apple, and the first time Toby drew her a picture of the ocean, which didn't exist on Corrigan's Reach, and which she had no context for at all, and had wanted, once she understood what it was, to see drawn again and again. The town, for its part, had settled into the specific rhythm of people who had decided, without ever holding a formal vote on it, that a hurt kid in the clinic was simply a fact of Holloway Bend now. Ada Okafor, who'd asked the hardest question at the meeting, was also the first to show up with a stack of blankets she dyed a soft green because, she said, it seemed like the kind of color that wouldn't hurt anybody's eyes. Hollis stopped by most evenings, not on duty, just to sit in the doorway of the back room with his hat in his hands and let Fig study him with the same careful, cataloging attention she gave everyone new. It was on the 10th day that Priya Anand's shuttle put down at the tracking station, and the town found out about it roughly 4 minutes before she walked through the clinic's front door. She was human, compact badged, dressed in the kind of practical gray uniform that said administrator rather than soldier, and she had the specific tired efficiency of someone who had made this exact trip before. She wasn't a generalist. Her posting was jurisdictional cases along the Ashkaray border specifically, the recurring mess of overlapping law that came with a 30-year cold standoff, which meant she'd spent more hours reading the Accord's fine print than most administrators ever needed to. She introduced herself, shook Mara's hand, and got straight to it, in a way Mara almost respected, even as her stomach sank.
I've read Sheriff Fenn's incident report. I need to see the survivor.
She has a name, sort of. We've been calling her Fig.
Something flickered across Anand's face, not unkindness exactly, more like the specific weariness of someone who had learned, professionally, not to let names complicate her job, and resented, faintly, being reminded that they always did anyway.
Doctor, I want to be straight with you, because I think that'll serve us both better than pretending. The craft that went down in your quarry has been identified. It matches an Ashkarai patrol configuration, non-military variant, consistent with a transport used to move dependents between border outposts during evacuation periods.
She paused. There's been fighting along the Kesef line for the past 6 weeks. Nobody here heard about it because it's the kind of fighting that doesn't make the compact news feeds. That craft was very likely part of an evacuation convoy that got separated and came down here by accident, not by any hostile intent toward your town.
So she's a refugee.
She's an unclaimed Ashkarai miner in compact territory during an active period of tension with the Ashkarai Concord, which makes this procedurally extremely delicate. I'd like to see her.
The shift in her voice from person to classification was so clean, so practiced, that Mara felt something cold settle behind her ribs. Fig was sitting up when they came in, and the moment she saw Anand, a new adult, unfamiliar, moving with the brisk, assessing walk of someone used to being obeyed, the light along her collarbone spiked hard, violet white, and her hand came up in the stuttering wait gesture Toby had taught them all to recognize. Anand stopped. To her credit, she stopped immediately, hands loose at her sides, and Mara watched her actually look at the child in front of her for the first time, not the file.
Ashkarai young are marked at birth. It's a chemical marker, mostly. Scent-based, it's how their family units track lineage claims. But a marker strong enough also gives off a trace energy signature. That's usually what a recovery scan actually picks up, since nobody's running a physical sniff test on wreckage. I don't see one on her, visually or otherwise. The crash telemetry doesn't show a marker signature at all.
Meaning what?
Meaning either she never had one, which is unusual, or it was damaged badly enough in the crash to stop registering. Telemetry alone can't tell us which. If it's the second, there's a clean way to confirm it once we've got the right instruments on site. If it's the first, there may be nothing to confirm at all. She looked up. Either way, I need to log her status and open a case file. That's not optional, doctor. It's the law. And frankly, it's also what keeps this from becoming worse than it already is.
And if the Concord comes asking?
Anand's expression didn't change, but something in her shoulders did. A small settling, like a person bracing for weather.
Then we follow protocol. And I hope, for everyone's sake, that protocol is enough.
Before she left, Anand paused at the clinic's front counter, data slate half closed.
I want to be honest with you about something else, Doctor, since you were honest with me. Holloway Bend isn't a priority posting. I'm not saying that to be cruel.
Mara waited. Anand set the slate down.
This town has 41 open infrastructure requests sitting in the regional queue. I pulled the file on the shuttle down, out of habit, water reclamation, relay tower redundancy, a second doctor, which, frankly, you should have had years ago. She glanced toward the back room, then back at Mara. Every one of them has been sitting for over a year because border towns this small rank low on every priority matrix the compact runs. They will keep ranking low. There isn't the political weight here to move them up the list, and there won't be, not because anyone's being cruel about it, just because nobody's forced to care.
So we're not owed anything.
You're not owed anything. That's the part I need you to understand before this goes any further. If the Concord pushes hard on this, and it decides to become a real diplomatic matter instead of a paperwork one, this town has almost no institutional weight to push back with. None of the usual weight anyway.
Then what do we have?
Anand considered the question longer than Mara expected. I don't know yet. I've been doing this job for 9 years, and I've never seen a colony this size decide anything as fast or as completely as this one decided something in about 6 hours today. That's not nothing. I just don't know yet what it's worth against an armed enforcement claim. I suppose we're all about to find out together.
She left an hour later with a data slate full of notes and a promise to file her report by end of day. Fig watched her go, light pulsing, slow and wary, and didn't relax fully until the shuttle's distant engine sound had faded off the ridge completely. That night, Mara sat with Toby on the clinic's back steps, watching the thin scatter of stars come out, and asked the question that had been sitting in her chest all day.
What happens if they come for her, the Ashgarai, if somebody official shows up with a legal claim?
Toby was quiet for a long moment, tapping 2 fingers against his knee, his own rhythm, not Fig's, thinking it through with the same seriousness he brought to a stalled engine.
Then I guess we figure out what we're willing to do about it. Same as anybody would.
He said it like it was obvious. Mara sat with that for a while after he'd gone in, turning it over, and found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she didn't disagree with a word of it. The quiet decision came 4 days later, and nobody made a speech about it. Mara simply drove to the county records office, a 2-room building 30 minutes down the valley that mostly processed land claims and mineral rights, and asked the clerk, an old friend named Sula, who delivered half the babies in this valley before Mara had taken over the practice, whether compact civil code had any provision for guardianship of a minor with no verifiable kin. Sula pulled it up without much surprise, because word had already reached even here. Community guardianship clause, she said, scrolling. Obscure, mostly written for orphan colonists after mining accidents, but the language doesn't specify species. It says, if biological kinship can't be established within a reasonable window by any responsible party, a settled community may petition for provisional guardianship pending further identification. She glanced up. You thinking what I think you're thinking?
I'm thinking that a reasonable window ought to start now instead of later.
She filed the petition that afternoon. It felt, at the time, like a small and quiet thing, a piece of paper in a slow-moving system, unlikely to matter much either way. She had no way of knowing, filing it, that within the week and a half that followed, it would be the only thing standing between a scared, unclaimed child and an armed Ashgarai enforcement team standing in the Grange Hall doorway. But that was still more than a week away. For now, there was only a quiet town, a slow-healing arm, a growing vocabulary of light, and a boy on a back step teaching a child from another world the rhythm he'd been tapping out since before either of them could remember why. There had been a night 2 days before the Concord shuttle came that Mara would only understand the shape of in hindsight. She hadn't been able to sleep and had walked the short distance from her own house to the clinic well past midnight, telling herself it was to check on a dosage she'd second-guessed, though she suspected, even as she walked, that it was really just to sit in the same room as the kid for a while. She found Hollis already there, sitting in the doorway of the back room in the dark, hat in his hands, not saying anything, just watching the slow blue-green pulse of Fig's collarbone while she slept.
Couldn't sleep either.
No.
I keep running the numbers. 400 people. No garrison, no defense contract, nothing but a county-issue sidearm, and a badge that doesn't mean much past the tracking station's transmission range. If somebody wants to come take her, Mara, there's not a lot standing in the way of that, legally or otherwise.
I know.
And I keep asking myself what I'm actually willing to do about that. Because I took an oath to uphold compact law in this county, and I don't actually know, if it comes to it, whether the law's going to be on our side or theirs. He turned his hat over once in his hands. I've decided I don't much care which way that goes. I know what I'm doing regardless. I just wanted to say that out loud to somebody, once, before it's tested.
Mara hadn't had an answer for that, not one worth saying out loud. She just nodded, and the two of them had sat there a while longer in the quiet dark until the sky outside had started faintly to lighten. The Concorde shuttle came down on the tracking station's pad without requesting clearance 2 days later, and Mara heard about it the same way she heard about everything in Holloway Bend, from Toby sprinting into the clinic, out of breath for the second time that summer.
They're here. Doc, they're here. There's 3 of them. They've got Sheriff Fenn's whole radio band lit up.
Mara was already moving. By the time she reached the Grange Hall, word had spread, and the building was filling fast, not with panic, but with the particular deliberate quiet of a town that had already, individually and without coordination, decided something and was now simply waiting to see if it would be tested. Hollis stood at the door, hat off again. Beside him stood 3 Ashkarai in the dark, close-fitted uniforms of Concorde enforcement. The one in front was older, heavier through the shoulders, with a bearing that suggested rank the way a straight spine suggests discipline. Behind him stood 2 younger enforcers. One stood square and still, hand resting near his sidearm, the way a man stands who has done this before. The other, smaller, lighter built, held himself half a step back from the other 2, uniforms sitting on him like something he hadn't fully grown into yet, eyes moving over the crowd instead of holding steady on any one point. Mara filed that away without knowing why, the same instinct that had made her file away the finger-tapping 3 weeks earlier. The lead enforcer's translator device, worn at the collar like a pendant, activated the moment Hollis stepped aside to let Mara through, and his voice came out flattened, mechanical.
I am Dasik Vaughn of the Concord Border Enforcement Authority. I am here regarding an Ashkarai miner recovered from a crash site in this territory 22 days ago. I have documentation establishing Concord jurisdiction over unclaimed Ashkarai dependents recovered outside Concord space during active evacuation operations. I require the miner be surrendered into my custody within the hour.
You drove 11 hours for an hour deadline.
The deadline is not negotiable.
Didn't ask if it was. Just noting it. You want to tell me why 3 of you came for a paperwork matter, and none of you brought whatever it is you'd need to actually prove the claim?
Something crossed Vaughn's face, not quite surprise.
Field kinship equipment isn't standard issue for a recovery escort, Sheriff. It's held at regional processing stations and requisitioned once a claim is contested. Standard procedure assumes voluntary compliance at first contact. It rarely requires more.
Well, today it does.
Priya Anand stepped forward from where she'd been standing near the front of the hall, data slate already open.
Coordinator Vaughn, she said, and Mara heard a note of genuine strain under the professional calm. There's a complication. This community filed a community guardianship petition 8 days ago under Compact Civil Code, citing the absence of a verifiable kinship marker on the minor in question. Until that petition is formally resolved,
The Concord does not recognize compact civil provisions as superseding a kinship claim.
with respect, Coordinator, that's not how the Border Accord reads. Article 11 requires verified kinship before a Concord claim supersedes local jurisdiction. If the marker was damaged in the crash, and it may have been, you don't currently have a way to verify she's yours to claim. Not without kin testing, you don't have the equipment here to perform.
Then I will requisition it. It will take several days. In the meantime, the miner comes with me.
No.
It came out simpler than she'd expected. No heat in it at all, just a flat statement of fact. Every head in the room turned toward her.
Doctor, Vaughn said, I understand this community has grown attached.
I'm sure you do, Mara said, but that's not what I said. I said no, not we're attached, no.
Vaughn's jaw tightened. The smallest fraction. Attachment is not law.
Agreed. So let's use the law you keep citing. Mara stepped closer. You said Concord custody is where she belongs. On what proof?
On the presumption that she is Ashkarai.
A presumption you already told this room you can't currently verify, so what you're actually asking this town to do is hand over a child on the strength of the fact that she looks like you and doesn't look like us.
She is a Concord asset, regardless of individual proof, Vaughn said, and something almost like impatience crept through the flattened translation. I have a war to manage the edges of, and 400 civilians standing between me and a legal obligation.
She's not an asset, Mara said. She's a kid who fell out of the sky and got taken care of. This town decided that was worth doing before anybody asked us to. Call that whatever you want. We're not moving.
For a long moment, nobody spoke. Vaughn looked past Mara, at the hall behind her, and Mara, following his gaze, saw it properly for the first time herself. Not a mob, not an armed standoff, just the town. Ada Okafor with her arms crossed. Sula from the records office, who'd driven 30 minutes on hearing the news. Denny, bandaged hand and all. Hollis, hat still off, standing at parade rest like he intended to stay there until the sun burned out. Nobody armed, nobody shouting, just a wall of ordinary, unremarkable people who had independently arrived at the same decision and were now simply occupying the space that decision required. It was the younger enforcer, the quieter one, who spoke next, his voice, translated, coming out lower, more hesitant than his captain's. "Coordinator," he said, "may I ask the miner a question before anything further happens?" Vaughn's expression, unreadable to Mara, but evidently not to his own subordinate, must have communicated something, because the younger enforcer took it as permission and stepped forward toward the side room where Fig had been kept, out of the crowd's direct view, with Toby sitting beside her the whole time, tapping 2 fingers against his knee, without seeming to notice he was doing it. The enforcer crouched at the doorway, Rihu, his collar tag red, and studied Fig for a long moment. Fig studied him back, light along her collarbone, spiking a wary, unfamiliar color, and then, slowly, settling into something calmer, as she recognized perhaps the shape of her own species in his face. Rinhu said something in Ashkarai, no translator engaged, soft. Fig didn't answer with words. She raised her hand, palm out, and tapped 2 fingers against her own knee, once, twice, in the exact rhythm Toby had been keeping his whole life, and looked past Rinhu, directly at Toby. Rihu went very still. Then he stood and turned back to Vaughn and said something low and rapid that the translator, still disengaged, didn't carry to the rest of the room. Whatever it was, it made Vaughn's jaw tighten in a way Mara hadn't seen from him yet.
Coordinator, Mara said into the silence that followed. I have a filed guardianship petition, an open legal question you've already admitted you can't currently resolve, and about 120 people who are not moving. You can go back to your government and tell them the recovery got complicated, or you can stand here until your equipment arrives in a compact border town on the wrong side of an accord you don't want to be the one who breaks.
Vaughn looked at her for a long time. I will requisition the testing equipment, he said finally, translator flattening even this into something colorless. It will take 6 days. Until it arrives, the miner remains where she is. He paused. Under continued compact civil hold, not Concord custody. I want that recorded precisely, Administrator.
Noted, Anand said, already keying it into her slate.
Vaughn turned to leave, and then, at the door, stopped and looked back, not at Mara, not at the crowd, but past all of it, into the side room, at the child sitting beside a human boy who was tapping his fingers against his knee.
6 days, Vaughn said again, and left without another word, his 2 enforcers falling in behind him. Renu was the last through the door, and he paused, just for a moment, to look back at Fig with an expression Mara couldn't fully read and didn't try to.
The hall didn't erupt into celebration. It simply, slowly exhaled. Mara found she was shaking, faintly, adrenaline draining out of her hands, and Hollis put his hat back on, and somewhere behind her she heard Ada Okafor say, to nobody in particular, well, that's 6 days then, in the exact tone of a woman already planning what to cook. 6 days. It wasn't a victory. It was a held breath, a door propped open instead of closed. The testing equipment arrived on the sixth day, on schedule, aboard the same shuttle that had brought Vaughn the first time, and by then Holloway Bend had stopped pretending the wait was ordinary. The Grange Hall had become, without anyone formally deciding it, the town's second home. Fig herself, arm fully healed now, moved freely between the clinic and the hall, under a small, constant orbit of company that never quite left her alone. Toby had taught her 4 words of English by then. Yes, no, Toby, and, with enormous ceremony, Fig, which she said back to him in a voice like stones settling. Vaughn came back to the clinic's back room this time without the rest of his escort, just Renu, standing quietly near the door, the way he'd taken to doing since the Grange Hall. Vaughn carried a case Mara recognized immediately for what it was. He set it on the table and looked at Fig for a long moment before he spoke.
I want you to understand something before I run this, he said, to Mara, though his eyes stayed on Fig. Whatever the result,
I'm listening.
Ashkarai kinship isn't chosen. It's marked at birth, biologically fixed. It's the entire architecture of family for us. We don't ask whether we want to claim a child. The marker tells us. The wanting follows the marker, not the other way around. He set a sensor lead down, precise. My station took orbital telemetry readings on the crash site the day it happened. They suggested, not confirmed, suggested that no marker was transmitting. But orbital resolution isn't clean enough to stand as a legal finding, and the readings sat unflagged for over a week besides. A recovery with no distress call and no confirmed marker ranks low against active fighting on the Kesev line, until someone files a formal claim on it. Yours did, eventually, through the compact's own channels, and that's what actually put me on a shuttle. I could have acted on the orbital hunch the moment it finally crossed my desk. I chose not to. I wanted the equipment in front of me before I decided anything, because a hunch isn't proof, and I don't take a child from a town on a hunch, whatever else you may think of me.
The room was quiet. Fig's light pulsed once, slow, watching him with an attention that made it clear she understood at least the shape of what was being said.
Can I ask you something, Coordinator? Mara said, while he finished calibrating the sensors. 6 days ago, you were ready to take her by force if it came to that. What's different now?
Renu asked to speak with me, Vaughn said, without looking up. The night we left your hall. He's young. He told me he grew up on a Concord station where unmarked children were quietly reassigned to processing facilities and rarely spoken of again. He said watching your town stand in that doorway was the first time he'd seen anyone choose a claim instead of simply having it handed to them by biology. He tightened a fitting. I don't have a tidy answer for what that means, Doctor. I'm not going to stand here and tell you it changed my mind about how the Concord should run its affairs. It hasn't, not yet, and I don't know that it will. I'll tell you it was enough to make me wait for proof instead of acting on a guess. That's what I can honestly give you. I won't pretend it's more than that.
He ran the test. It took 11 minutes and confirmed what the orbital readings had only suggested. No marker and never one at all. Some rare developmental irregularity, documented but uncommon, that meant no Ashkarai family had ever felt the pull toward her that their biology guaranteed. No one had ever been coming to look for her, not because she was lost, because she had never, biologically, been anyone's to begin with. At the end of it, he closed the case with a quiet final click and stood.
The Concord has no verified claim, he said. I will file accordingly. Whatever the guardianship board of your compact chooses to do with the petition on file, it will not be contested by us.
He crouched to Fig's eye level, hands open. He said something in Ashkarai, soft, not reaching for the translator at all. Fig's light pulsed, considered, and then, slowly, deliberately, she raised her hand and tapped 2 fingers against her knee, once, twice. Vaughn went very still, and Mara understood, without needing the translation, that whatever question he'd asked, she'd answered it with the only language she'd found worth keeping. He stood, nodded once to Mara, and left. Renu lingered a moment longer in the doorway. She is fortunate, Renu said, translator engaged, quiet. I did not expect to say that about an unmarked child. I am glad to be wrong. The guardianship petition cleared the compact board 4 weeks later, filed under Anand's careful documentation, granted to the town of Holloway Bend as a collective civil body rather than to any single household, which struck Mara, reading the final ruling, as exactly right because it hadn't been any one person's decision. It had been 120 people, independently, arriving at the same place. It did not come with anything else. The 41 infrastructure requests stayed exactly where they'd been in the queue. Vaughn's official filing, when Anand eventually shared the language with Mara, was clinical, a finding of fact, a jurisdictional note, nothing warmer than that on the record, whatever had passed between them off it.
I told you, Anand said, not unkindly, showing her the report. You get the kid. You don't get the water reclamation. That's not cruelty. It's just how the queue works, and I didn't want you finding that out on your own.
I know, Mara said. We weren't doing it for the water reclamation.
Anand herself stayed 2 extra days past what her assignment required, ostensibly for paperwork.
I've filed a lot of these.
She admitted it the evening before she left, sharing a plate of Ada's cooking with Toby and Fig, both on the clinic steps.
Unclaimed minors, border incidents, jurisdictional messes. Most of them end with a transfer form and a case number, and nobody ever thinks about the kid again once the file's closed. I've never seen a town just decide the way you all did, before there was any law backing you up at all.
We filed the petition because it needed filing. Figuring out whether it would work seemed like something to worry about after.
I'm going to recommend a review of the Community Guardianship Clause. Broaden the language. I can't promise it goes anywhere. These reviews die in committee more often than not, and I won't pretend otherwise. But I'd rather try and have it stall than not try at all.
She left the following morning, and the shuttle's engine sound faded off the ridge the same way Vaughn's had weeks before. That evening, Mara sat on the clinic steps where she'd sat with Toby on the first night, watching the same thin scatter of stars come out over the same gray sky. Fig sat beside her now, close, her collarbone light settled into its familiar slow blue-green. Toby sat on her other side, tapping 2 fingers against his knee without noticing, the way he always had, the way Fig now did too.
Doc, you think anybody's ever going to explain this to the history books, right?
Probably not. History books like the parts with fleets and speeches. This part doesn't have either.
Toby considered that, still tapping, and glanced sideways at Fig.
You think she'll ever get a real name? Like, an actual one. Not just Fig.
That's up to her, when she's ready.
I asked her once, a couple weeks back. Drew the question out on the slate best I could. She didn't answer, just did the wait light.
Then not yet.
Fig, who had been listening with a particular stillness she brought to conversations she only partly understood, reached over without any prompting and tapped 2 fingers against Toby's knee this time, instead of her own, a small, deliberate reversal, offering the rhythm back to the person who'd given it to her in the first place. Toby laughed, surprised, and tapped it back, and the 2 of them sat there for a while, doing nothing more complicated than trading the same small rhythm back and forth between them. A question with no urgency behind it at all, a question that could wait as long as it needed to. Above them, Corrigan's reach turned slowly under its thin gray sky. Unremarkable, unfamous, still short a second doctor, and a working relay tower, and 39 other things nobody 11 hours away had gotten around to yet. And underneath all of that, still, a kid who fell out of the sky, and a town that hadn't asked anyone's permission to keep her.